Hello everybody and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today we'll talk about how to improve your API designs with vocabularies by using registries, and we'll do that together with Mike Amundsen. Hey Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to be back with you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks. Yes, I'm looking forward to that as well. And it's something that I think we've both worked on for quite a while. It's about kind of taking APIs from just working on single APIs to really working on API landscapes and what kind of maybe additional design thoughts should go into this. So when we think about vocabularies, what kind of imagery does that evoke in your mind when you think about APIs and vocabularies?
Well, the thing that comes right to my mind is something I've heard you say over and over again, which I agree 100%, and that is that APIs are a language. When you're designing an API, you're really designing a language, and every language has a vocabulary, So I think we need to sort of design that vocabulary and make that real. So I think that's the first thing I think of right away. And sometimes those vocabularies, I think, are good candidates for their own kind of standardization or sharing. And I think that's where managed, registries kind of come to play. Is that about what you think, or?
Yeah, and thanks for pointing to those languages, right? That's definitely something that I like saying, that APIs are languages. And I think in every language, pretty much, when you think about it, right, you don't design it from scratch, but instead, ideally, you can use some building blocks to build a language with it. And the more you can use those building blocks, the less design you have to do, and the easier it also is for consumers of the language to understand that building block and say, oh, I know what that means, right? I don't have to learn that from scratch. And I think that's what we're going after.
Yeah, and those building blocks, a friend of ours, a co-author I worked with, Leonard Richardson, called those building blocks magic strings. They're like little bits and pieces that have magical meanings, and like where did you get the meaning? How is it that you understand that? And that's where these various little building blocks or registries come from for him. And I think that's a cute little way to think about it. I like thinking about it in that sort of way.
It definitely is a cute way to think of it. And I think just giving two examples maybe of these magic strings that we probably have encountered in many APIs or user interfaces. So typical examples I would say are languages and countries. Right, so you will have many APIs that talk about languages, or many APIs that somehow talk about countries. And of course, you don't want to go and start compiling a list of countries, because that's a lot of work and it's not really that interesting. So what you do instead is you go somewhere and say, hey, do you have a list of countries, right? And then you end up with country codes, and there are your magic strings, I think.
Yep, exactly.
So where would you go?
Well, it turns out you go lots and lots of places, right? IANA, the Internet Authority for Names, right, or something like that, and addresses. That's the one I think of first. But there's ISO, has thousands and thousands as well. There are lots of places, and sometimes that's a bit of a challenge. I even go to places like the Microformats website, or schema.org has lots and lots of magic strings. So there's lots and lots of places, but I think the primo is probably the IANA list, right?
Depends on what you do, as you say, right? There's, of course, many places where you can go, and it depends very much on what kind of building block you're looking for. But IANA is probably the most important player in the internet and web space, at least for the, let's say, a little bit lower level things. And I just looked it up because I found it interesting. So IANA has registries, and country codes and language codes are some of the registries they have. They have many registries. So just asking you, how do you think how many registries IANA has?
We talked about this earlier. I was figuring several hundred, right? Hundreds of registries. Registries, not even entries, right? Registries.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, not entry, and many more entries, yeah. But turns out they have 2,389 registries,
wow,
containing many more entries, of course. So lots of magic strings there.
So there's easily tens of thousands of magic strings, all just in that one space.
I mean, they vary in size a lot, right? So if you look at the country codes and the language codes, I think the language code registry is pretty extensive. The country code registry is much shorter. And then there's even shorter ones, right, where it's like a registry for, I don't know, like an 8-bit value, where there can't be that many entries in that.
Sure, but there's registries for media types, right? There's registries for protocols, there's registries for port numbers, registries for HTTP status code. HTTP verb has like 45 or something entries in the registry. So there are lots and lots and lots of things to keep track of.
It actually would be, and maybe I'll do that when I have time, like compiling a statistic of all the registries and how many entries they have. I would like to see that graph.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, it would be so useless. I probably won't do it, but but it would be fun seeing that. What's the biggest registry? What's the smallest one? But so as you said, I think there are registries that I think everybody in the API space knows about because we use them all the time. Like you said, there's a registry about HTTP request methods, there's a registry about media types, there's a registry about status codes, there's a registry about link relation types, right? And we've all worked with those values as part of our API designs. And that kind of feels natural, I think, to everybody in the API space because that's kind of the fundamental building blocks you have to work with anyway. There's no way around that. But when we talked about like today's topic, right, we also talked about, well, there's more to that. So in addition to working with those existing building blocks, what is the other thing that could be a good recommendation to make for your API design practice?
Well, I think the thing that we discussed and that I've run into several times, you brought it before, is the idea of eventually I sometimes need to build my own registry. I'm creating some API language about accounting or user management or whatever the case may be, and I'm generating these magic strings. Well, where do the definitions come from? Where does that material end up? So I, for many of my applications, end up creating a page or a set of link connectors, which is, it turns out, a registry. I didn't really think about it early on, but that's really what I'm doing. I'm registering values myself.
Yes, and that's of course good practice, right? But I think like there is a little bit of a difference we can make between documentation and registry. So in my mind, I would say, if you document those things as part of your API, they are documented, which is good, of course, but they're not as easily reused, right? Because they don't have a life of their own, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that is the practice that I would like to actually see more and encourage people more to say, look, if you do things that are potentially reusable across APIs, then turn those into registries. And you can pick any name you like. It doesn't need to be the name registry. But the concept of using that as a building block, I think that is really nice because then you can use those building blocks and you can make them part of new designs and you kind of save on design work, and people using them also save on reading up on them because they've encountered them before.
So really, this has more to do with, so I was using the case where I'm building a web app or I'm building a web language or something like that. I need my documentation. But what you're talking about now is if I'm using things that other people could use, they're more generic, they're more widely used, those need to be in a more widely found registry, like an IANA registry or some other place, right? That's kind of what you're thinking.
It just would help, right? Yeah. So one of the things, for example, we've seen is that when we created RFC 7807, the problem reports.
Problem details, yeah.
Then in there's a type identifier, right? And the type identifier allows you to surface like a more specific problem type, which is useful. But it doesn't tell you how to manage those types. So what ends up happening in many cases is that a lot of APIs define their own problem types that they are producing. But these get not shared across APIs, right? So for example, then if you would say within an organization, you have multiple APIs where you can order stuff, and then there's one problem type that would say, well, we didn't accept the order because you don't have enough money in your account. it would be nice if all APIs were using the same type to signal that condition, right? And then somebody using all the APIs wouldn't need to understand 20 variations of this. You even would be able to start writing, you know, like user-facing text that you can reuse and all these kind of things. So I think that's a pattern that I don't see as much as I would like to, which is why we're here today.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good idea. I was just reviewing the problem details for HTTP APIs for a project I was working on, and I was thinking the exact same thing. I think there's like one default type or something like that, but there's no talk about, in the current version, there's no talk about a registry, which I thought, boy, that would really be handy, because I'm generating a lot of these long strings, 82, 88 strings or something like that.
Yes.
But having some registered types would help a lot.
And I don't want to be confusing now, but there's like a separate discussion, but which is similar, which is about maybe there should be an IANA registry for these problem types, so that, you know, if there are generic problem types that are useful for everybody in the API community, that would be nice as well, that we have an IANA registry that makes those problem types reusable. But that doesn't change the fact in my mind that definitely every organization should have their own way of how they say, these are the problem types that we use. And if you want to look up which ones you use, here are all the ones I use. If you design a new API, please consider reusing them that we have. And if you create a new one, put them in there so that people can find it and understand it.
You know, we talk a lot in the business about reuse, code reuse, service reuse. What we're now talking about here is registry use or entry reuse or these little building blocks reuse. If we're going to get on the reuse train, we need to ride the whole route, and I like this idea.
Yes, but the interesting thing for me is so far I haven't found a way to make registries sexy. It's something that people just find, they don't find that interesting, I've found. So I wrote a draft a while ago, right, like talking about registries and how they could be useful, basically telling everybody who's building a building block to consider maybe adding a registry to it. If there's need for it, right? But it just seems that maybe it's not a common enough thing to do for people, so that we don't have like the tooling and the practice and all of this. But I would hope that it gets a little bit more traction.
I like this idea. So were you working on like an IETF BCP, a best common practice or something like that?
Yeah, it was the idea basically of, if you're designing a registry for a new specification, right? What are the design thoughts? So for example, if you put a value in the registry, is it stable, right? Can I rely that this stable will never change its meaning? Because that, I think, is important, but it's not necessarily the case, right? Or is there a model how you can retire values and mark as this one should not be used anymore in the registry? All these kind of things, right? And this is not really super complicated, but I think it is just good practice when it comes to managing vocabularies, right? Making them stable over time, making them extensible, making sure that they can be found, that they're documented, then there's a model how they evolve, all these kind of things.
Just like any other part of the API, just like any other part of the interface. Yes. I think that's actually, I love this idea. I love this idea very much. This is how I can improve my APIs, by using this kind of registry process. I love this.
Okay, so maybe you will help me to make registries sexy again, or I don't think they ever were.
I don't know. Working with this, I don't think you got a good chance, but we'll see.
Yeah, we have to work on. I think we just have to find a cooler name. Registry is just like the most uncool name you can imagine, I think.
All right, we'll work on that next.
Okay, we'll work on that. If you have any suggestions for that, please put them in the comments, like a good brand name for registries, something that is really cool. Probably some planet name or something like that.
Magic strings.
I don't know. Okay. Maybe better than registries, but somewhere in the middle. So
wizard strings.
Maybe we can aim a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Unicorn strings. No.
There you go.
We'll find. Okay, I think we've reached the useful end of this discussion.
Apparently
Apparently we have. So thanks, Mike, as usual, for
Good to see
being here, and it's great discussing these things with you. Thanks everybody for watching. If you found this interesting, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And until next time, this was it with getting APIs to work today. So bye, everybody.